That's Dre's tutoring? Hey guys, welcome to today's video where we'll be going over large biological molecules. As you guys see here, we do have some lipids here, we have some nucleic acids, we have some carbohydrates, and we have proteins. Now, originally this video was supposed to go over all of them, but I changed my mind, and if we just write a little thing there, I actually want it to be about carbohydrates. Just spend a good amount of time because I think these are all of them are important macromolecules and biological molecules, but I want to stick to carbohydrates, and then we'll go into the nucleic acids and everything else, right? So if we go into our next slide, macromolecules. What is a macromolecule? A macromolecule literally means a huge or a big molecule. So if we look at the word macro and macromolecule, that literally just means big. So what we have are these big, humongous molecules that are very important to biological systems and life, whether that's plants, animals, your pet snail, your pet plant for some. They all have macromolecules that are very important to drive life and drive function throughout the body. Again, for the sake of this video, we'll be talking about carbohydrates. Other macromolecules include lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. An example of a macromolecule can be an enzyme. If anyone knows me well, they know that proteins are my favorite thing, and I rave and talk crazy about proteins. To form these enzymes that are used in the body, like this huge one here, we have amino acids that form polypeptide bonds, and then eventually there's so many of these amino acids, it eventually curls up and becomes some 3D structure like that. And that is considered a macromolecule. It's composed of many molecules that help drive function, okay? So macromolecules, what are they made up of? Again, we can skip back to the protein thing where a lot of these things are made up into something else that's made from something else. What does that mean? We have macromolecules, they're made up of something called polymers. And then polymers are made up of something called monomers. Now, a polymer is a long molecule consisting of similar building blocks linked by covalent bonds. A monomer is the individualized repeating units that make up a polymer. So, okay, DeAndre, let's go back to this whole protein thing that you always rave about, right? We know that proteins are made up of amino acids that are bonded by peptide bonds, and eventually these polypeptides form a functional enzyme. So think of that same thing here. I don't want to confuse anyone, but think of that with macromolecules, where you have this large macromolecule that's made up of polymers, and then the polymers are made up into monomers. So if that didn't hit your head yet, let's go ahead and zoom into this bottom area here. We have something called starch. Starch is a large carbohydrate that is used to store glucose in plants. So let's see what we have here. We have glucose molecules. So this is one glucose here, here, and here. These individualized units, you see I'm writing 1, 2, and 3. These individual units are called monomers. Monomers, right? Now, when these monomers link together, they form something called a polymer. So this whole thing here is considered a polymer. And once those polymers start to build up, they create something called a macromolecule, like you see here, this starch. So I know it's kind of blurry here, but let's say this is a monomer. And let's see how long I can go without making a mistake. We have a monomer, 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 monomer. I give up. But you guys get the idea. All of these monomers are forming polymers and eventually forms a macromolecule. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of let you guys know what a macromolecule is before I get into the carbohydrate, which is a macromolecule. So again, all these four classes are all macromolecules, but for the sake of this video, we're talking about the macromolecule, the carbohydrate. Okay, so now that we understand what a macromolecule is, we have our carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are just simply sugars or polymers of sugars. The simplest sugar that we know is a monosaccharide. Then we have also something called a disaccharide, which if you look at the di, which means two, it's just two monosaccharides. So we have, let's just say we have a monosaccharide, which is also a monomer, right? And we want to form a disaccharide. It would just be two monomers or two monosaccharides together to form this disaccharide. Now, if we were to add another monosaccharide here, we would have something called a polysaccharide, right? So now we have a polysaccharide. Two monomers, disaccharide. As we continue to add more, a polysaccharide. And then eventually we have so many that are linked together, and then they form a carbohydrate. So let's talk just a bit about, some examples. The monosaccharide, right? That's the simplest form that we know. Examples are glucose, fructose, galactose. As you guys see here, the only difference here is really in the carbons that are there, the carbons, and the positioning of the OH groups for some of these, right? But they're fairly the same. I don't know if you guys seen that commercial a long time ago. It's like, these are all ways to first go, all different types of sugars. It's just a disguise, glucose, fructose, galactose. Yes, it's somewhat true, but yes, those are all sugars. Now, if we go into our disaccharide, an example of a disaccharide is sucrose. Our most commonly known sucrose is our table sugar that we so love, that we put in our coffee or teas or whatever you put it in. I don't know. I'm not with you guys when you guys have breakfast or dinner or anything, but I put it in my coffee. So what we have is sucrose, maltose, lactose. These are all different disaccharides, meaning we have two monosaccharides or two monomers linked together to form this disaccharide. So let's look and zoom in here and look at some of these disaccharides. So to create maltose, we need two glucose. So we have one monomer here, one monomer here. And notice how I'm saying monomer, monosaccharide interchangeably, because a monosaccharide is a monomer, but a monosaccharide is a sugar. Okay, and I want you guys to kind of practice the different terms, and I'll talk more about that at the end of the video. But again, we're forming this disaccharide, and we have two glucose or monosaccharides, and then we form this maltose. Now, if you guys are asking what is going on here, this is called a dehydration reaction. A dehydration reaction is what is used to link these monomers together. So in order for us to create the maltose, water has to be released. And then we have something called a glycosidic linkage or a glycosidic bond. These monomers are held together by a covalent bond and use the dehydration reaction, or also known as a condensation reaction, to form these bonds. How I like to memorize this is dehydration. Think of loss of water. Look at this lonely water just leaving. It's going by because we need these two monomers to link together. So that's what a dehydration reaction is in the synthesis of maltose. The same is true for, actually, is it here? It is not here. I think I have another slide going over how some of these bonds are broken. But nonetheless, we do have another one here, the same idea, another dehydration reaction where we have glucose and fructose, and then we have a dehydration reaction with the loss of water forming sucrose. And it's held together by this glycosidic linkage with the oxygen there, okay? And again, that's how we form our table sugar that we so love, okay? All right, let's talk about sugar classification. Now, in sugar classification, we do have a classification of sugars. It starts off with a 3-carbon sugar, 5-carbon sugar, and a 6-carbon sugar. So Dre, how would I memorize this? Simply, if it has 3 carbons, it's a 3-carbon sugar. If it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it is, well, I'm sorry, that's wrong. If it has 5, if we look here, let's circle it out. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 carbons. So this is a 5-carbon sugar or a pentose. And if we look here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons. So this is a hexose or 6-carbon sugar. So we can always count those carbons. Don't be afraid to use your fingers to count. And that's how we can tell if it's a 3-carbon, 5-carbon, or a 6-carbon sugar. Now it's also divided by another column where it says aldoses and ketoses. Now for this, a good way to memorize this is if we look over to our right, we do have the ketone and the aldehyde, which I'll circle in just a bit. I'm just cleaning up this chart. We have the ketone and then we have the aldehyde. Now, if we take, let's look at this ribose, for example. We know it's a 5-carbon sugar, but how do we know? Like, is it an aldose or is it a ketose? Well, anyone that knows me very well, I talk about the CO group that we have here, the C double bonded to O, the hydrogen, and then it's connected to something else. And if we look at what an aldehyde is, we see we have a carbon double bonded to an oxygen, bonded to a hydrogen, and then bonded to something else, which is the R group. So we have the same deal for this ribose. So we can classify this as a 5-carbon sugar and say that it is an aldose. If we look at our ribulose to next to us, we see there's a CO or C double bonded to O. It's bonded to something else and then bonded to something else. And that's exactly what a ketone is. It's a C or carbon bonded to an oxygen, bonded to something else, bonded to something else. And we could classify this as a ketose. So this is just a little classification of sugar. So when you're putting in that sugar into your coffee, you can tell your friend, hey, I am putting a 3-carbon sugar in my whatever, I don't know. Well, actually, that would not be true. But you guys get the point. This is how we classify sugar. Now let's talk about our polysaccharide. For our polysaccharide, this is a polymer. This is many different monosaccharides that are linked together, right? We talked about our disaccharide. Yes. So our polysaccharide, there's different types. There's a structural, and then there is a storage. So the typical ones for the structural are cellulose and chitin. The storage is starch and glucose, right? So again, polysaccharides, you have a whole bunch of monomers that are linked together, and this is what a polysaccharide is. And then these polysaccharides create that carbohydrate, okay? So an example of a polysaccharide that we have is in the storage aspect is starch, which is the storage for plant glucose. We have an image here where we have a potato, right? And we know that plants store their energy into fruits and potatoes. And one of the carbohydrates they use to store this energy is starch, as we see here. Now we're getting to all of the fun stuff. We talked about monosaccharides, disaccharides, polysaccharides. This is a very huge polysaccharide or a macromolecule where we have starch. As you can see, monomer, monomer or monosaccharide, monomer, monomer, all linked together and eventually creating this long, huge macromolecule that will be used in the body. When an animal goes ahead and eats that potato, they're taking in that carbohydrate. And what we're doing is we break these bonds, and this is called hydrolysis. And I don't know if I had a slide here. I could have sworn I did have something here where it mentioned hydrolysis. Oh, it was right here. Silly me. I can't believe I skipped this. Yes. So we have the dehydration reaction here where we are losing water to form this longer polymer, but we also have something called hydrolysis where we break bonds as well. So when that animal eats that potato and that carbohydrate gets broken down, we add water, which also we have enzymes in our saliva that break down carbohydrates, but we hydrolyze that long polymer, and then this monomer goes by. It goes out somewhere else where it can be used and recycled. So we do have dehydration reactions and we have hydrolysis reactions. I can't believe I skipped that one. So if we go back to our slide, we're back here, our starch, large macromolecule, okay? And that's used for storage. Next, we have glycogen. This is the storage for animals. It's stored in the liver and muscle cells, and it's released by hydrolysis as well, where, look at this, we have glycogen, this huge macromolecule that's in the liver made up of monomers, and that can get hydrolyzed to have these short polymers be used for something else. All right. Lastly, we have our structural. So there's two different types. There's chitin and then there's cellulose. So cellulose is used for the tough walls enclosed in plant cells, and I kind of have this mixed up here. As you can see here, we have like a bark, and then we have our carbohydrate here, right? Held by that glycosidic bond that we talked about. And this is what gives the rigidness of these plants. It is cellulose, tough walls that enclose the plant cell. Then we have our chitin, which is found in insects, spiders, crustacean, exoskeleton, and fungi. It's similar to cellulose. However, cellulose, the glucose monomer is a bit different. Chitin has a nitrogen, as you guys see here. So if you ever want to know the difference, look for that nitrogen in chitin. And we have our guy, Mr. Krabs here, that is rocking that good old chitin with the nitrogen. All right. So this is the last slide. I did mention that I wanted to talk about memorizing these. It's very important to remember all of these different terms as far as what a carbohydrate is, what a macromolecule is, monomer, monosaccharide, disaccharide, polysaccharide. Let me just go over this real quick. I'm just going to slide back. You guys can end the video here, but I'm just going to do a quick review. We have large biological molecules. For this video, we talk about carbohydrates. These carbohydrates are macromolecules. Macromolecules are made up of polymers, then monomers, right? Starting at the monomer step, they are held together by glycosidic bonds through dehydration reactions, and they can form these long chains of polymers. This most simplest carbohydrate, we have our sugars, we have monosaccharides and disaccharides. Disaccharides are two monosaccharides that are linked together. And as we continue on, we get polysaccharides. Again, these polysaccharides held by glycosidic bonds through dehydration reactions. We have our sugar classifications. We have structural and storage carbohydrates, okay? So that was just a little quick review. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope it helped just memorize these things, think concepts when you guys are going in for tests. And that concludes this video. Let me know if you guys need anything else. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next video. Peace.